When we're talking about risk, it's important for us to remember that some actions are riskier than others, and we could place the actions we do on a scale from being low risk. That doesn't mean that there's no risk at all, it just means that there's not very much, to being medium risk, to being high risk. And where we place it on the scale is going to depend on two things. Firstly, how likely it is that something bad will happen. And then secondly, the severity of that outcome. So, how bad would it be if things went wrong? So, for example, reading a book is quite low risk. It's very unlikely that something serious is going to happen, something seriously wrong is going to happen when you're reading a book. Eating too many sweets, I've put as medium risk because you might start to feel a little bit unwell, or in the long term, if you kept doing it, you might damage your teeth, but none of those outcomes are super severe. Whereas, for example, teasing an angry dog, it's very likely that if I tease an angry dog, it might turn around and try and attack me, and it's also very likely that the outcome of that could be quite serious. I could get very injured from that. So here are a few more situations that we can look at. One activity that you might all be familiar with is sewing a button onto a jumper. So where do you think that that should go? I'll give you a minute to have a think. Okay, so to me, sewing a button on a jumper, I'm not going to put it quite as low as reading a book, but I don't think there's that much risk involved in that. I might poke myself with a needle, but especially if it's something that I've done before, and especially if I'm careful, it's unlikely that something very serious is going to happen to me. So I'm going to put that as quite low. Traveling in a car without a seatbelt, what do you think about that one? I definitely think that that is a very high risk. It is quite likely that something would go wrong. We can't control other drivers in their cars. We don't know what's going to happen. And if we were in a car accident while not wearing a seatbelt, it's very likely that we would be very seriously injured. So that is definitely a high risk one. Okay, next one. Agreeing to meet a stranger who contacted you in an online game. That one is definitely very high risk, isn't it? It's quite likely that something could go wrong and something could go very seriously wrong if we did that. Okay, the last one is chopping vegetables with a sharp knife. Where do you think that one should go? I think this might depend on how experienced you are. So if it's something that you do every day, you might decide that it's quite low risk because you're unlikely to injure yourself. You know how to be careful with that, but it's still not as low as reading a book because if you did cut yourself, you could injure yourself. Or if it's something that you don't often do and you're really, really not experienced with it, you might decide that it's medium risk because you're quite likely to do something wrong and injure yourself.